If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of May 5th, 2024. The podcast that's gone 4,800 days without an accident. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's evacuate the news of the bogus. War without end. Amen. Amen. That seems to be the hail of President Biden, at least when it comes to Ukraine. Not only has he signed into law another $61 billion to go to Zelensky, they're working on a bilateral agreement which would last 10 years. That means that Biden is even making decisions for the next president about it. Remember that treaties are ratified by both the president and the Senate and are considered part of the supreme law of the land. They can't be overridden by the president without the Senate going along with it. Hey, remember back in 2022 when this was only going to take a couple of months because they had Russia on the run? Zelensky said, quote, "We are already working on a specific text. Our goal is to make this agreement the strongest of all. We are discussing the specific foundations of our security and cooperation. We are also working on fixing specific levels of support for this year and the next 10 years. The Russo-Ukrainian war has been going on since 2014 with the US-backed Euromaidan coup. It's already been going on twice as long as the Civil War, World War I, and the Russian Civil War. It's already gone on longer than World War II, the Revolutionary War, the Iraq War, and the Soviet-Afghan War. If it goes on for another 10 years, as this agreement would ensure, it would be going on for over 10 times as long as the Mexican-American War, the Crimean War, the War of 1812, and the Spanish Civil War. It will have been going on longer than Queen Anne's War, the Haitian Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, the Wars of Alexander the Great, the Vietnam War, and even the war in Afghanistan. This will extend almost 6 years beyond the end of his presidency. But most importantly, this agreement could stop Trump from ending the war, as he has promised to do if elected in November. It's not the first move the war powers have taken to try and Trump-proof the Ukrainian war. Diplomat Chaz Freeman had said a month ago, quote, "NATO has run out of Ukrainians to sacrifice on the battlefield, as well as the armaments production needed to equip the existing, greatly depleted Ukrainian armed forces. A bond fund will neither create more Ukrainians nor produce more weapons to arm those who have so far survived." This was around the time NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said they need, quote, "to shield the mechanism against the winds of political change." But as Freeman said, what Ukraine and Russia both need, quote, "is peace, and this demands negotiations with Russia. This is a shameless attempt to use financial capitalism to avoid that reality, while further enriching munitions manufacturers. NATO is not a hedge fund, and should not attempt to behave like one. When alliances attempt to borrow money for lost causes, you would be right to judge that they know the jig is up." And this would suggest he was right, since Biden is rushing out the first $7 billion in weapons, an indication that they don't exactly have those poor, inept Russians with outdated and expired weapons on the run. Zelensky said, quote, "We are still waiting for the supplies promised to Ukraine. We expect exactly the volume and content of supplies that can change the situation on the battlefield in the interests of Ukraine. And it is important that every agreement we have reached is implemented, everything that will yield practical results on the battlefield and boost the morale of everyone on the front line. In a conversation with Mr. Jeffries, I emphasized the need for Patriot systems. They are needed as soon as possible." And if you want to know why they're so insistent on all of this, just read Smedley Butler's War is a Racket, because nothing much has changed since then. So, once again, it's perpetual war for perpetual peace, as a certain humble podcast host predicted it would be after Russia invaded. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odysee.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odysee is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odysee to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odysee.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. And we have yet another update in the U.S. government's ever-shifting stance on cryptocurrency, including continued regulation by enforcement. Now, they've stepped it up to regulation by criminal enforcement. The indictment against Samurai Wallet is now unsealed, as well as the DOJ's opposition to Roman Storm's motions in the Tornado Cash case. Both of those occurred on the same day the FBI issued a warning to crypto wallet users saying they may be subject to criminal seizure if they don't move their money into a regulated entity. All of which goes directly against the policies long established by FinCEN. For years, we've seen increasing regulations, particularly KYC regulations, against money transmitters, which in this sense are centralized exchanges which must now register. Dubiously, it also applies to any other person engaged in the transfer of funds, without any clarity about what that actually means. We covered before the criminal arrest of the Crypto Six for the crime of selling Bitcoin to people, which the government called money laundering. Not to mention the confusing and contradictory regulations governing cryptocurrency, some of which say it's currency, some say it's funds, some say it's a security, and some say it's an asset. FinCEN has said since 2013 that cryptocurrency is not currency, but it's value that substitutes for currency, meaning that its users are not money transmitters and neither are developers. Additional guidance published in 2019 said that wallet developers couldn't be money transmitters because, quote, the person participating in the transaction to provide additional validation at the request of the owner does not have total independent control over the value. It was at least clear regulations that only required custodial exchanges to license and be subject to federal money transmission regulations. But now, Samurai Wallet, a Bitcoin wallet that uses CoinJoin to enhance user privacy, was indicted for unlicensed money transmission and conspiracy to launder money, even though what CoinJoin does is basically the equivalent of changing a $100 bill for a bunch of 5s and 1s. As for Tornado Cash, the government is arguing against their motion to dismiss because they say, quote, Section 1960 does not require the business to have control of the funds. What? And they say the developers are culpable because they, quote, caused cryptocurrency to pass from one place to another on the Ethereum blockchain every time a customer requested a deposit or withdrawal, a criteria that could apply to every wallet. And on top of it all, they arrested crypto advocate Roger Ver for selling Bitcoin. The Department of Justice said in a statement, quote, an indictment was unsealed yesterday charging Roger Ver, an early investor in Bitcoins, with mail fraud, tax evasion, and filing false tax returns. Ver was arrested this weekend in Spain based on the U.S. criminal charges. The United States will seek Ver's extradition to stand trial in the United States. And just after he published a book exposing the government's involvement in Blockstream, which took over Bitcoin years ago, making decisions that resulted in long wait times and high fees. His book tells the whole story. The arrest is about Bitcoin he sold in 2017. Here's the wrinkle. Ver has been living in Japan since 2005 and renounced his U.S. citizenship in 2014 after obtaining citizenship in St. Kitts and Nevis. Don't want to pay taxes? Just leave. Yeah, apparently not. They allege that by June of 2017, Veer's companies had about 70,000 bitcoins. He took personal possession of them and sold them for $240 million and didn't pay his taxes to the IRS, which they claim total $48 million. You can't win, you can't break even, and you can't leave the game. This isn't justice. This is mafia extortion, plain and simple.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
And just in case you're under any delusion they're going to stop at crypto, the Department of Commerce has proposed new KYC requirements for anyone who gets a domain name. In particular, rights holders are calling for KYC with all domain name registrars and registries and require them to take down pirate domains. It's yet another attack on anonymity on the internet, one of the things that made it great. And while they're not calling for a full-blown internet passport, this is another step in that direction. Trump kicked it off in 2021 with an executive order requiring KYC of infrastructure as a service companies to stop foreign cybercriminals. Then Biden passed an executive order last year to try and curtail potential abuses of AI, which would put an end to anonymity for users of online cloud services. The Coalition for Online Accountability, the Orwellian name for a cartel including the RIAA, the MPA, Disney, Warner, NBC Universal, and others, wrote in a filing, "There is no doubt that the motion picture, music, and video game industries have long suffered from widespread online piracy and other abuses. It is important that all U.S. domain name registries be required by the forthcoming regulations to maintain complete and accurate databases of the identity and contact information of all registrants for the domain names that such registries administer. For purposes of cybersecurity investigations, as well as the mitigation and prevention of cyber attacks and other malicious cyber-enabled activities, it is critical that government agencies, as well as cybersecurity investigators and organizations, be able to access this customer data directly from GoDaddy regarding the .us domain and VeriSign regarding any .com or .net domain name and other domain names that they administer." And they whine about the fact that people enjoy basic constitutional protections. Quote, "Currently, many domain name registrars turn a blind eye on the rampant domain name abuse practices. They provide the means and instrumentalities for impersonation, making no effort to collect true and correct data about their clients." Keep in mind, they're talking about people like you and me who haven't even been accused of any crime, and before there's any reasonable suspicion of having committed any. They want domain name registrars to be included as IaaS. Quote, "The term also is inclusive of domain name service providers, such as domain name registrars, domain name registries, domain name privacy and proxy services, or other domain name authorities, regardless of whether they are accredited by an international multi-stakeholder policy-making organization." So, Biden's executive order would apply to them, too. They also say, quote, "The domain name registrar, registry, privacy service, proxy service, or other domain name registration authority must disable, disrupt, or suspend any domain names used for domain name abuse within 48 hours of receipt of a notice submitted in good faith from a trusted notifier." And guess who the trusted notifiers are? Of course, we don't know if the Department of Commerce will kowtow to their demands, but the big content cartels are serious about it, and we know the dangers that can happen to our rights as a result of that.
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-aged children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now it's time to sub-optimize this week's biggest bogon emitter. We followed the misadventures of Germany shutting down its nuclear power stations for no good reason, even after losing the Nord Stream pipeline meant a difficult winter for them, and they're faced with major health issues regarding the extreme cold. We covered how they kept the last few reactors going during those winter months, but then continued with the shutdown anyway. Turns out, that shutdown continued only because of major deception from the German Economy Ministry, which willfully excised expert advice supporting the continued functioning of German nuclear power plants. Cicero magazine reported that the officials, who were members of the environmentally extremist Green Party, deceived the government and the public by ignoring expert advice and proceeding with the nuclear phase-out. The magazine obtained documents from the Economy Ministry, including emails, memos, meeting notes, and letters ignored by the Green Party to push their anti-nuclear agenda. The experts were not only excluded, some of their assessments were deliberately falsified. The magazine accused Economy Minister Robert Habeck of misleading the public in February 2022 when he said in a TV interview that shutting down the power plants would somehow help Germany during the winter. That contradicted expert advice, as well as thinking about it for 2 seconds, which says that more energy means less dependence on natural gas and better self-sufficiency. Germany's last 3 power plants were shut off in April of last year, but they didn't have to be. Habeck claimed that the fuel would run out by the end of 2022, and extending it would cause safety issues. Although it is true that since they were shutting down, safety checks hadn't been run at the plants, they could have done those checks easily, even on short notice. It's also true that they hadn't ordered new fuel rods, and the rods they had were going to run out. And since it can take a year or more to order new rods, that couldn't be done in time. However, it's not the case that rods just run out like a battery or a car that's out of gas. They'll still keep going for years. They just won't produce as much power as they otherwise would have. The expert committee not only said it was possible to keep the plant going, but specified 3 scenarios for doing so, at least one of which would keep the plants running for several years, and said that all of them could be done safely. And in each case, new fuel rods could be ordered and installed when delivered. But apparently, someone in the ministry who wasn't an expert and wasn't a member of the committee rewrote their recommendation to falsely say that keeping the power plants running wasn't compatible with safety requirements. Whereas the experts actually said it was extremely risky to rely on coal plants, which Habeck brought back online. Andreas Jung, parliament member and leader of the Christian Democratic Union political party, said, quote, "There is still a reasonable assumption that Habeck's ministry did the opposite of what he had publicly announced, distortion of facts instead of open-ended examination. Suspicion is getting stronger that the decision to phase out nuclear power was not done openly, but was determined from the outset, that people were tricked and deceived." This is a major scandal and should be a lesson to the world to be skeptical of all such claims about nuclear power. Germany is paying the price for this. Here's hoping they reverse course before things get even worse for them. So all of that makes the German Economy Ministry this week's biggest bogon emitter.
I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv.
And now let's self-attend to this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire!
Dan O'Dowd got Biggest Bogon Emitter on the February 19, 2023 edition, and we covered his deceptive videos showing Tesla's full self-driving to be unsafe, an experience not shown by any other Tesla owners who tried it. For one of them, O'Dowd paid millions of dollars to have it shown on the Super Bowl. You remember the guy, the owner of Green Hill Software, who says that his software, quote, never fails and can't be hacked, a phrase which receives howls of derisive laughter from any expert. O'Dowd agreed to join a Twitter space for a debate with other Tesla owners to defend his reputation. Big mistake. He only served to destroy what was left of his credibility. There's a lot here, but at least I've saved the long segment for last this time. We got more information about what his beef really is. It turns out O'Dowd didn't like the fact that Tesla rejected his company's operating system and went with Linux. O'Dowd has been a vociferous Linux hater for many years.
I said, you shouldn't use Linux in your car. That's crazy. And he says, I'm the guy who got to the International Space Station with Linux. I said, doesn't it have to run 10 minutes to get there?
What? No! The fastest it's ever taken was a bit over 3 hours, and that was a Russian Soyuz module in a very ideal scenario. The SpaceX missions take just over 20 hours, and that's not including the time it takes for all the preparation that the systems already have to be running for. Besides, there are Linux systems that have measured their uptimes in decades, so I don't know what he's talking about. And apparently, neither does he.
And by the way, rockets are a 2-9 system. They fail about 1 in 100 times. Your average rocket blows up. Whereas your average car has to operate out to about 7 nines before it's even competitive.
Remember him using the nines figures. That'll be important later.
I'm curious where you're getting your statistics from. Because
that was only a rough number. I don't know the exact number.
Ah, well, isn't that convenient?
5 nines puts you at about 1 every 165,000, which is roughly how often an accident occurs by human drivers.
No, you're that what you just said is nonsense. Let me get into it. 5 nines, I believe, is 5 minutes a year is the failure.
That's for server. That's for servers, right? So people aren't driving 24/7.
So old Danny Boy doesn't know you figure accident statistics by miles driven, not time.
How would you like to normalize it so we can speak in math here?
Well, I don't deal in nines.
But then I don't think you should quote it, right?
Took the words right out of my mouth, Meta. And he says that several times throughout the debate.
Like I said, it was just, I don't deal in nines. I mean, really, we don't do nines here.
And, spoiler alert, you'll hear it again. Okay, so let's get to his safety claims.
Elon said the data is unequivocal that supervised full self-driving is 4 times safer than a human driving alone. That is false. That is completely false. It is outrageously false. Everybody who gets in the car with me, I ask them that question. Is this thing 4 times safer than human? They say, no, it's not. In fact, they say it's way worse than your average beginning driver.
Yeah, well, maybe everybody who gets in the car with me isn't a very scientific or reproducible selection criteria.
Can you help me understand why Elon's statement is false? Because he's not talking about the software alone. He's talking when it's combined with human.
I understand that. I understand the distinction. It is a pretty pathetic distinction given that supervised FSD is bullshit and nobody wants it, but fine. We can talk about this useless product, but is it safer? No.
Would you say...
We did a test. We did our own tests.
Yeah, we saw your tests, O'Dowd. Meta 4 pointed out the issue.
But if you remove the human and AEB and you only look at AEB on its own, it's obviously a terrible system, just like better braking would be or other things along those lines. So it's a strange comparison to say, let's look at humans plus AEB and AEB is good, but let's not look at humans plus FSD and FSD is good.
O'Dowd went on speaking for over 2 minutes without actually answering the question.
If you're paying attention, though, and you're actually holding the wheel ready to make a movement, like you should be according to what their terms and service say, then it's instant. Well, I mean, blame the person, though, not the software.
No, nobody keeps their hands on the wheel. Have you seen, Omar never has his hands on the wheel. We never have our hands on the wheel. Jillian never has her hands on the wheel. Chuck Cook never puts his hands on the wheel. Nobody puts their hands on the wheel. It's designed to be full self-driving. You don't have your hands on the wheel. I've tried to drive with the hands on the wheel. You can't. If you have your hands on the wheel and you're there and you move it, you disengage right there.
That self-same Omar of Holmar's catalog was there to prove him wrong.
Well, first off, obviously you are driving the car. You get into the car as a human driver. You choose to turn it on when you want it. You turn it off when you don't want it. You rest your hands on the wheel. If you're making a video, that might be one thing. You want to show people that it's driving. But normally I always just rest my hand on the wheel. You're fully in control. This is a supervised ADAS system, just like your company sells. And I want to point out the irony that Dan O'Dowd
I wasn't allowed to answer that question because you stopped my subject. You've brought it up again. You haven't finished the last subject.
Dan, hold on. I'm trying to make a point here.
One after another. Come on, everyone, let's calm down.
I just want to point out the irony that Dan was driving in a Tesla Model 3, and he had the forward collision warning go off to help him prevent a crash. FSD and the work they're doing helped stop him from getting in a crash. And he doesn't realize that this multi-million-dollar ad campaign he's spending against FSD is hurting people.
That is false in every way. You do not have your hand on the wheel. You do not have your hand on the brake, your foot on the brake. You do not have your foot on the accelerator, and the car is driving. That is driving itself, not you. The human is supervising the software driving the car. That's what's going on. And you keep saying it's you, and Tesla says it's you for legal reasons so they don't get sued. But the product itself jerks the wheel with no warning.
Well,
when you have a fraction of a second to save your life, and I don't want that in my car, and neither do all the people who bought it. They're not using it.
The buck stops. The buck stops with the person sitting in the driver's seat. So this is supervised FSD. Yes, it does. This is supervised FSD. People are encouraged. They have to keep their hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, and if the software does a mistake, humans must take over and prevent that.
I'm only trying to make sure that that's not true.
You're disputing facts here, man.
What?
You're disputing the facts here. This is a fact.
No, I'm not. I am working very hard to make it be Tesla's fault for shipping a product that is not manageable by ordinary human beings.
And yeah, that's pretty indicative of how the conversation went whenever O'Dowd was challenged. And regarding O'Dowd's idiotic claim we've covered before that he can write software that, quote, never fails and can't be hacked.
If you have a life-saving, human-advancing technology to write completely bug-free software, why would you keep that to yourself versus actually advance humanity forward? I feel like what you're doing is you're saying every engineer, Demis Hassibis, Ilya Sutskever, every single engineer who's well-meaning is an idiot, and you're the only person who knows how to make software.
Well, that's a stupid statement. You make software, and so does those other guys. So that's a dumb statement. So let's try another one.
Yeah, he never wants to back up that claim.
If you're not an expert, how are we going to have a founded engineering discussion? It's all going to be anecdotes and hearsay.
I don't do anecdotes.
Yeah, you do, Dan. We just played it. In fact, all of your videos and ads about Tesla FSD are just unverified, unreproducible anecdotes.
It doesn't need to be supervised. Waymo didn't do it that way. Waymo didn't put something on the road until they had tested it thoroughly, both in simulation and, as I do, by writing tests, by building tests.
This is wrong. They do actually have supervision.
Fact check here, Dan. Even in their most recent safety report, they reported 20 accidents in the first million driverless miles without a driver behind the wheel. And the first one was severe. Nobody died, but somebody hit the car from behind. You can't have zero. You're making a lot of statements. You've stated you're not an engineer. I believe you've also stated you're not a lawyer.
No.
So I would ask as an engineer.
I am an engineer. I have a degree in engineering, and it's what I've done for the last 40, 50 years.
But you can't speak about nines? What kind of engineer doesn't speak about safety in terms of probabilities?
The ones who build things that don't fail.
In law, there's a phrase, res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself. I'm going to offer a new Latin phrase, stultus ipse loquitur, the idiot speaks for himself.
We can look at statistics from NHTSA. In the most recent year, they said 1.35 fatalities per 100 million miles traveled on average. Those are the statistics we have. Now, FSD has driven 1.4 billion miles. If we just sort of multiply that out, it suggests that 19 people should have died traveling 1.4 billion miles. I think the data NHTSA has suggests that there was one fatality where somebody was using FSD beta. And that doesn't even necessarily mean the system was responsible. So you're essentially advocating for killing 19 people in my mind. You've spent millions of dollars for this. And when you look at the fact that FSD is now driving 1 billion miles every 60 days, this would essentially lead to an extra 5 to 7 fatalities every month, I think. So this is really the core of the issue and why I think what you're doing is so reprehensible. I mean, you're spending millions of dollars of your money that could go towards so many things, feeding kids, educating people, and you're spending millions of dollars to advocate for basically banning seatbelts, trying to kill people. It's just so absurd.
Dan, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, that's all false. The whole thing is baloney. It is not.
So then
safer.
Where are the 19 people
Wait a
that
minute.
are dead?
Nobody, he gets to talk for 3 minutes and insult me the whole time, call me a killer and a murderer, and you cut me off after 30 seconds. Boy, this is really a great debate here,
When did we call you a killer? When did we call you a murderer?
Like I said, stultus ipse loquitur. You see the kind of person O'Dowd is.
Why don't you build your own thing, ship it out there, and show us how much better it is, as opposed to wasting, say, tens of millions of dollars on advertisements trying to disprove another person's product without ever making one?
You mean me developing a full self-driving car system?
Yes. If you think you know better, then I dare you to do so.
Well, no. Like Google has literally spent 15 years and 20, 30 billion dollars. Elon said he's spending 10 billion this year. I don't have that kind of money. I can't do that.
Then perhaps it is obvious that your systems in certain cars are becoming obsolete. Could this also be the reason why you are so heavily opposed to Tesla software?
No, there's no chance this software is ever going to be in self-driving. There's no chance.
Oh, did he touch a nerve there, Dan?
As you're approaching better and better safety, that area under the curve where you're denying the use of the vehicle with FSD, those deaths are someone's responsibility. Engineering is about trade-offs. Engineering is not about 100%.
Well, I disagree with your premise. The more you keep FSD off the road, the less people die.
That's not what the data shows. If you
have no data to prove that. You have nothing.
If we're talking about fatalities, there are hard facts. If you want to discuss,
he clearly doesn't want the hard facts, Meta.
You've taken an oath. If you're an engineer, you took the oath of the engineer. I encourage you to reread it. In there, it has a lot of statements that would go to the effect of, don't make statements you don't know about.
I didn't. I said nothing about any of those. You brought up AI. I didn't.
FSD is an AI system, and you're talking about testing an AI system.
Yeah, I'm testing to see whether it kills people, and the answer is it tries.
You can't test an AI system like it's a heuristic system. You're using the wrong methodology. It's like trying to throw water on a chemical fire. You're using the wrong method.
So I'm supposed to let it run over little children because it's stupid.
Okay, let's get to where Adrian, the host, challenges O'Dowd on one of the videos we covered, the Super Bowl commercial where FSD runs over a child mannequin. This is his chance to set the record straight.
In that video, though it was very low resolution, so it's very difficult to tell this, but you can actually still tell. You can see a small little icon at the bottom with a little warning triangle there. And this is exactly what you would see if you were to say, hold down the accelerator pedal, even though you have FSD engaged. The person who is testing this thing in the video held down the accelerator pedal. And what's even more interesting enough is this specific road had a bunch of cones on it, which essentially limited the FSD in its decision-making ability to, say, swerve off to the side. It's not going to swerve into a bunch of cones. It literally is not going to do that. So you caged it, essentially, held down the accelerator pedal, and let it run over a mannequin, and are using this as a test. You're making this exceedingly difficult to actually see, especially when it comes to seeing this little icon on the screen, because you uploaded it in such a poor resolution that this is either malice or you just have an incompetent media team.
No, that is false and actually libelous.
How?
It is not true. It's absolutely not true. The accelerator pedal was not pushed. I have affidavits to that behavior, just in case some idiot said that. There is no indication that the pedal was not pushed, and there's nothing to indicate that it was. You are just making that up.
Can we have like the HD version of this video? Can you release the HD version?
That video is just taken by somebody in the back seat with a handheld camera.
That is very convenient, isn't it?
No, that's just because there was somebody in the back seat with a handheld camera.
Well, those cameras are still high def. Your commercial aired and was uploaded to YouTube at 540p.
There's no obligation that we had anybody.
So a Super Bowl ad that you spend millions of dollars on was filmed by a random person in the back with a handheld camera in low resolution.
And he just continued evading and lying and not actually answering any questions for the full 100 minutes. Sometimes I'm stuck for commentary because the idiocy is just so obvious there's nothing to say other than my new phrase, stultus ipse loquitur, made specifically because of Dan O'Dowd, and that means he must be this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this Would You Mind Not Farting While I'm Saving the World edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord or at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Edward Snowden. When you say, I have nothing to hide, you're saying, I don't care about this right. You're saying, I don't have this right because I've got to the point where I have to justify it. The way rights work is, the government has to justify its intrusion into your rights. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.